female unemployment has dropped to the lowest rate since 1971. The Office for National Statistics included the figure in data showing that the overall unemployment rate in the 3-month period stood at 3.8%. That's the first 3 months of this year. And as I say, that is the lowest rate since the early 1970s. Why is this happening? I'm delighted to be joined now on the line by Hanna Wheatley, who's researcher at the New Economics Foundation. Hanna, very good afternoon to you.
Hi, John.
What's the answer to my question? Why is it happening?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that it does seem good on the surface at first glance, but unfortunately it's a bit more complicated than it seems. So one of the main drivers that the ONS are talking about is the state pension age change, which means that women are having to work longer I think it changed from 60 to 65.
These are all the waspy women who weren't told that they were going to have to stay on and work, despite the fact that the government said that all of them were given letters and that it's their fault and that they didn't prepare. Of course, none of them, or hardly any of them, were given letters, and it was sprung upon them.
Right, exactly. So that's one of the things that the ONS is saying is a main driver. And the other thing that I guess I'd add to that is that there are increasing numbers of women doing part-time or kind of insecure work where they're kind of on 0 hours contracts or working short hours contracts. And so they're counted in the employment figures. So it looks like, great, we've got more and more women in work. But actually, a lot of those women aren't getting the hours that they need, and then kind of further questions about wages as well. So yeah, it seems like a good news story, but needs a bit of unpicking.
Right, that is interesting. The other thing that I noticed reading the analysis about it is that we're not getting any better off as we did back in the 1970s, and moreover, back then productivity, which is of course the amount that each worker could produce, was on the rise. But now, according to the latest figure, productivity has dropped.
Yeah. And the main thing about wages is that, it's true that we're in the kind of longest period of wage stagnation for about 200 years. So real wages are still kind of lower because the cost of living is increasing, and that's outstripping the wages that people are actually earning. So even, compared to 10 years ago, real wages are still lower than they were a decade ago. And on top of that, with kind of wage stagnation overall, the gender pay gap is also still large, and that's even worse kind of when you intersect that with ethnicity. So women of colour, the gender pay gap is even larger still.
That's interesting. What's the difference between men and women in the gender pay gap?
I don't have the figures off the top of my head, but I think it's around 15% or so.
Still as much as that?
Yeah, and so I guess there's a few things there, and that's that more women are more likely to work in part-time and insecure work, and to work in kind of caring roles, which we know are undervalued in the wider economy. So yeah, we've seen this double thing of women kind of not necessarily getting all the hours that they need to, and then when they are working, still aren't being paid enough to kind of really be making ends meet. And we've still got this ongoing cost of living crisis, which means that we're seeing families where, people are going to food banks and parents are employed, but it's still just not quite enough, or people are taking out loans to kind of put food on the table.
I was feeling all happy when I read these figures, and now you're
sorry.
dragging me right down with this detailed analysis, but then I suspected that would probably be the case. Are these figures massaged? Is this the real level of unemployment?
Well, I guess we need slightly finer tools to be able to talk about it, because while people might be in employment, they might still be underemployed, so not having enough hours or as many hours as they would like. And there is kind of a criticism that these numbers, in order to look good, count, very, very little work, but still as kind of employment. And I guess what we really need is figures that show the reality of the world of work for women. And so what we would argue for is a measure of good jobs. So looking at jobs that are secure, that pay at least the real living wage, which is calculated based on how much people need to earn to live in London and outside of London. And how the living wage?
And how do 0 hours contracts fit into these figures?
Well, they are included, and what we need is obviously flexibility, because women are also more likely to have caring responsibilities and to, desire and need some flexibility around their work to fit into those things. So we shouldn't kind of blanket ban or think, entirely that 0 hours contracts shouldn't be used, but we just really need to be thinking about using them responsibly and making sure that people who want to be on 0 hours contracts can be, but only when the flexibility really works in their favour, and it's not just companies using them so that the flexibility, the employee takes on all of the risk and the employer takes on all of the benefits of that flexibility.
Hanna, I much appreciate you talking us through the figures and picking them apart for us. That's Hanna Wheatley, who's researcher at the New Economics Foundation.